Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this year's virtual Ahmad Tehrani Symposium. Before I say a few words about this evening's event, I'd like to begin, as we have all our architecture events this fall, with a land acknowledgement. MIT acknowledges indigenous peoples as the traditional stewards of the land and the enduring relationship that exists between them and their traditional territories. The land on which we sit is the traditional unceded territory of the Wampanoag Nation. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced occupation of their territory, and we honor and respect the many diverse indigenous people connected to this land on which we gather from time immemorial. Thank you all again for being here tonight for the fifth Ahmad Tehrani Symposium, which was created by former department head Nader Tehrani in honor of his father. Nader is no stranger to MIT and to architecture. He is currently the dean of the Irwin S. Channon School of Architecture at Cooper Union in New York. He's also the founding principal of NADA, an internationally renowned firm that boasts among its projects 3 schools of architecture and the almost completed MIT graduate student housing project in Kendall Square. Nader is a stranger, however, in another way. Allow me a few sentences to explain. Tonight, we are celebrating the memory of Ahmad Tehrani, who I had the big honor to know, and someone whose poise, grace, and elegance are difficult to forget. In a message he shared with the Cooper Union after the murder of George Floyd, Nader describes his own condition as a stranger through a very captivating account of his father that I would like to share with you. I quote, "On a family trip from Johannesburg to Maseru, I recollect our first journey through the countryside, as my parents would have us think along to West Side Stories, I Want to Live in America, with an innocent optimism. At that time, not knowing in any way that my destiny would in fact bring us to America. That period was by no means the end of apartheid, but even at the age of 7, I was witness to the first signs of its waning moments." And I continue to his description of his father. "In his capacity as ambassador to South Africa, Lesotho, and Swaziland, my father was the first representative of Iran in these lands, recognized in the category of white denomination. For this reason, it felt all the more telling to my youthful eyes to see him redesignated as colored by the state trooper who stopped him for speeding on our return trip to Johannesburg. My father's concurrent dignity and impotence under the gaze of the police would be forever etched in my memory. In that time, designations of white, colored, and black were reserved for people of different racial classifications and their rights defined accordingly. Living with against apartheid was indeed the ambassador's own plight. Many other daily episodes became part of our new normal for 4 years, but little did I know that even if it seemed to be the beginning of the end of apartheid, that I might yet live through them again in another history across the Atlantic Ocean a half a century later." End of quote. These conditions of strangeness that Nader describes through his father, of voluntary exile and then of forced exile, may be familiar to many of us, but very few people have managed to translate them into a disposition from which to view the world with such generosity and compassion as well as Ahmad Tehrani. He was indeed a citizen of the world, but also a convener of worlds. It is therefore very befitting that this annual event in his honor brings together designers from around the world to discuss emerging issues that transcend national and disciplinary boundaries and that address our humanity and its values wherever we are, to be at home in our strangers. Tonight's conversation will be no exception, as we are delighted to host designer Eddie Opara and architect Eric Chang for an engaging discussion that will explore intersections of design and architecture, with a focus on media's capacity to bring people together in public space and its role in society and in civic design. And now I would like to turn screen and microphone to introduce Nicolas de Monchaux, current head of the Department of Architecture, who will say more about our guests and the topic of today's discussion. Nicolas.
Thank you, Hashim. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. And thanks once again to my predecessor, former department head Nader Tehrani, for his generous and continued support of the department through this annual symposium. It has been my pleasure to know Nader since a fateful internship in an office adjacent to his almost 25 years ago. And I thank him particularly for his wisdom and guidance across the years, especially as I've entered into this role, as usual, many steps behind him. I've also been fortunate enough to have several conversations with Nader about the remarkable legacy and character of his father, Ahmad Tehrani, and it is with particular pleasure that I add my first contribution to the symposium in his honor tonight. Now, for those of you who find this lecture on whatever the internet becomes a decade into the future, I would emphasize that we're meeting tonight in the middle of an election week, at the end of an election season in the United States that has thrown many issues, including those under discussion tonight, into relief. The role of public space and the role of media in creating environments could not be more timely, and particularly the role of designers and citizens in building civic spaces and civic media that connect and do not divide. Such a spirit is in fact at the heart of the Tehrani Symposium itself, which Nader intended to connect communities across architectural and design practices, from engineering to graphic design as architecture as tonight and beyond. We all work better as we reach across practices, identities, and divisions, small and large. And I know Eddie and Eric will touch on these issues in their presentation on their past collaborations tonight. After Eddie and Eric's presentation of their work together, we will be joined by MIT visiting lecturer and award-winning publication designer, Miko McGinty, who's a longtime co-conspirator of Eddie's. I'm working with Miko and a dedicated group of students this year to work on how design and media can better connect our own community in the department through publications that form a common space of our work in this socially distanced year. This includes our current lecture poster and identity designed with Miko, by Miko, alongside one of our student collaborators, Emily Wisman. Particularly in anticipation of that collaborative conversation, I invite all of you joining us to post questions wherever you are watching, on the webcast page or on Facebook, and we'll get straight to it after giving our guests tonight their formal introduction. Eddie Opara was born in London and studied graphic design at the London College of Printing and Yale University, where he received his MFA in 1997. He began his career as a designer at ATG in Imaginary Forces and worked as a senior designer and art director at 2x4 before establishing his own studio, the MAP office, in 2005. He joined Pentagram's New York office as a partner in 2010. Opara is an amazing and multi-talented designer whose work encompasses strategy, design, and technology. His work and the work of his studio spans brand identity, publications, packaging, environments, exhibitions, interactive installations, websites, user interfaces, and software. Particularly relevant to tonight's lecture in the spirit of the Tehrani Symposium, he has collaborated with architects including Shop, SOM, Grimshaw, ARO, and of course, Bureau Ola Shirin, where Eric is a partner. As you will see tonight, Eddie's enthusiasm for both design and collaboration is infectious and inspiring. Eric Chang is partner at Bureau Ola Shirin and has been collaborating on the management of design of numerous projects with Ola Shirin for over 15 years. Eric is an American with a Bachelor in Philosophy and Fine Arts and received his MArch from Yale. After starting his career at Gluck & Maynor in New York, Eric was an associate at OMA and general manager of OMA's Beijing office. Since then, at Bureau OS, Eric's been involved with a wide range of public projects, including the Duo development in Singapore, the Gardner Art Center in Beijing, and MahaNakhon in Bangkok, where an intensive collaboration took place with Eddie that they'll share with us tonight. As many architects know, and Eric is also smart and courageous enough to admit, we do not work alone, particularly in making spaces with and for the city. And so we're particularly delighted to have both Eddie and Eric join us tonight for the Ahmad Tehrani Symposium. Over to you both.
Thanks, Nicolas. thank you so much, Hasim, for your introductions. As Nicholas has stated, I'm Eddie Opara, partner at Pentagram. And with me today is Eric Chang. And I've known Eric for quite some time. We have our paths have crossed many times. We will be showing you where our paths really crossed within this aspect of the intersections for the MahaNakhon project. But we also will be showing you other projects that sort of intertwine, are partly precursors to the idea of MahaNakhon, to understand the sense of intersections of the media and architecture and space. The engagement on experience of people. Eric, would you like to say some words before we begin?
Sure, yes. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Hashim. Thanks, Nicholas, for the introduction. Thank you for inviting us to talk with Eddie. It's a great opportunity to reconnect with him. As he mentioned, we've known each other for a long time. We have been working in different parts of the globe. We want to share with you our work on MahaNakhon, which was a fairly intense collaboration, but also maybe talk about a few themes that we think are relevant where our work has crossed paths. I think it's a slightly trying moment right now. It's a bit hard to refrain from being consumed by the news. But I think it's also an important moment to stay positive. And I think as designers, we're kind of preternaturally geared towards that, to be optimists, since we are involved in designing and shaping the future. So I think with that, Eddie can get us started.
I certainly will. Oops, 1 second. So we've broken down this particular presentation and you could say conversation into different parts. And we wanted to start off with this particular area called logical thinking. It is a precursor to what we're going to be talking about with aspects of intersections, and it's incredibly important. The idea that visuals are the underpinning of a way that is all about, even though the project is all about the aspects of function, it is as crucial as the engineering itself. A few years ago, I was asked to Samsung Galaxy 8.
Guess what I just got? Oh, my phone. You gotta send me that pic.
So with that, the idea of graphic design is ever sort of fragmenting. And what I mean is that some now would, within the digital area, would basically state that graphic design is either integrated into the idea of user interface rather than the other way around. But the manner of this is incredibly important. As I said, the visual underpinnings is as crucial as the engineering. They are foundational in the construct of a particular product and project. And Samsung are a very sort of crucial part of that in regards to how they collaborate with different types of designers. And they allow they've allowed this idea of taking the upper strata of the overarching architecture to allow you to be part of that engagement, a sense of play, sense of interaction, a cognitive type of visual thread that's really at the heart of the organization and how it's communicated, thus its brand. And what I'm basically talking about is how the idea of brand is basically really affecting us within our spaces today. How it becomes really an important factor of building narrative. The reason why this is the case in point is that one looks at graphic design as, oh, you just do logos, or you put a sign on a building, and that's not the case anymore. If we really think about it, we really are embodied within every type of space, because of every phone that you're utilizing is integrated into that particular space. And that's one of the reasons why I'm sort of showing you these particular projects. Another project is Oppo. Oppo is also a leading smartphone company, and how they also try to embrace the whole idea of what we call the foundations, taking the foundational root of a counter space and really exploding that into a typeface called Oppo Sans. And so the counter spaces are the negative spaces within the construct of the typeface. And I sort of look at a type in a very sort of sculptural way, that we're always cutting away at it to actually create the expression that we want to communicate to the public. And with that aspect, that's how I also look at how I would actually work and collaborate with architects such as Eric, and that we were going to talk about very, very soon. So the other aspect of Oppo is that they're not just looking for a brand, as I said, a logo mark, but they're looking for an overarching foundation to build upon, so they can actually communicate many different ways and many different things within the aspects of experience. And that experience is incredibly potent, because it's going to not just be on a phone, it's going to interconnect into Internet of Things and also artificial intelligence more and more. And it's going to integrate, and thus architects and designers like myself have to learn how to actually collaborate more with that particular essence about it. You know, one of the things that I did sort of talk about a little bit was the aspects of user experience and the elements of narrative, and the idea that the graphics build narrative, but architecture also does that. And I'm sort of going to hand this over to Eric. I'm going to control the slides, but Eric will start off talking about the Guardian Art Center.
Thanks, Eddie. So yeah, as Eddie said, you know, logical thinking really is the underpinning for a lot of design work. It informs the architecture for user interface, but it also informs or forms the underpinnings, and it sets up a conceptual framework for architecture. I wanted to show you our project in Beijing called the Guardian Arts Center. It's a hybrid building that is the headquarters for China's second oldest art auction house, which is on the lower portion. And the upper portion is actually a boutique hotel, the Pushuan by Urban Resort Concepts. And since the program or the functions that would go into this new headquarters were kind of so complex, and it was the first time for the organization to kind of be in its own home, we actually carried out a whole research project in a way with Hong Kong Design Center to interview extensively all the different users, both on the staff side, but also on the audience visitor side. And also an information kind of audit of Guardian themselves, together with Cram Weishar, who are a graphic design, IT, industrial design firm. Reed Cram actually is an alumni of MIT's Media Lab. But the project is situated in the heart of Beijing, not far from the Forbidden City. Here's a section through, and you can see all the various spaces. There are huge kind of column-free auction hall and exhibition spaces in the center. There's a courtyard on the top. You can see hotel rooms kind of in a ring, and an art club tower that we introduced towards the center of that. But we started the process before we even got into architecture to really look at what happens with users. And the Guardian auction house actually would conduct all their auctions off-site previously in multifunction spaces and ballrooms, et cetera. So we went and mapped out what that process really is to have a better understanding before we even start designing operationally what's happening. So on the left, you can kind of see what happens almost on the back of house side in terms of processes. On the right is the visitor customer side. And that also had a very interesting breakdown in terms of who goes to the auctions. There are buyers, bidders, viewers, but there are also aficionados. There are newcomers. There are syndicates that are involved in auction. So it's a very diverse group that actually participates in these events. And we did the interviews there. And then on the next step, we kind of tried to identify where are there bottlenecks? Where are there moments where things get stuck? And how could we improve those in the new design? So operational issues, experiential issues, but also kind of interface or access issues. So that informs both the spatial organization for the architecture, but also the information that users are getting when they actually go to the auctions. The next thing we looked at was the calendar in terms of having a new auction hall space, event space, exhibition space, how much of that is really programmed and how much of that is occupied. And we compared it to London Fashion Week because it has a diversity of events. Guardian itself is centered around mostly two main auctions in the spring and the fall, with smaller temporary auctions in between. But we thought, this shows a real opportunity to expand their event offering, because there are spaces then that can be cross-programmed for other events related to art, auction, culture. And the little diagram on the bottom right shows kind of the typical offering that they had at the time when auctions were held off-site, and basically a number of different amenities that we could add into that with the new design, where there would be basic things like seating, better customer interface and collection areas, food and beverage, rest areas, internet lounges. And that was the idea, to kind of generate the program and write the brief for the project. On the information side, we also recognized that as an auction house, they had a massive collection actually in their archive that was not necessarily accessible to the public and could be used to promote and engage. And we did this study with Cram Weishar, as I mentioned, and they looked at how to organize that huge data set, possibly also write algorithms for word search that would allow people to find artworks more easily. We also looked into, in the next case, how that information could be mobilized to also engage a larger audience in a new demographic. This was a moment where e-commerce has really taken off in China. There's also a certain level of social media engagement that Guardian had not been involved in, so we had proposed that they get more engaged that way. But one of the main things that would allow that would be at least a unified interface across devices, PC, laptop, tablet, smartphone, and in a way to have that interface scalable so that it could even be used as an app during auction events, which would cross over into how this information gets filtered through and interacts and informs people when they're actually going through the space, the architectural space. So this could extend, if designed scalably, to also provide wayfinding, tie in with the signage in the actual architecture. And so when you're at the event and attending an auction, you would actually be able to look at the device and it could search things for you. You could get more information for it, but it could also guide you through the actual space. This wayfinding scalability, in a way, I just wanted to show a little bit more on the space, extended to the design of the architecture as well, where we took as a source of inspiration, but also as a way to tie the building back into its context. It's a landscape painting from the 14th century by a Chinese landscape painter called Dwelling in the Fushan Mountains. It has an interesting history where it got split up in the 1600s. One part stuck in Hangzhou, another one in the Palace Museum in Taipei. And we kind of symbolically said, let's join this very horizontal scroll, rejoin it. And we used it as a map to essentially translate into a series of circular pixels, the pattern of the landscape painting onto the building to kind of unify all the massing of the architecture and also tie it together with the smaller scale neighborhood that's next to the site. So you can see here the circular lens windows translated into the architecture. And there are all kind of 3 sizes, all optimized. It looks complex, but there was a system to it. And from the interior, it means that the auction house spaces get ample daylight, also have views that are mediated through these little, well, some are small, some are larger, but circular lens windows where you can kind of see from the future projection of Guardian through the history, looking through to the old Hutong neighborhood in Beijing. And maybe 2 quick shots of the main lobby. When people enter, one side goes into the headquarters, the other side goes into public space. This is one of the column-free exhibition halls that are 1,700 square meters, so around 20,000 square feet, unoccupied, but then also taken over during events. Here you can see one of the anniversary events. And the programming has really kind of worked successfully. I think Guardian has realized that there is a lot of capacity to invite others and kind of form a new cultural center in the middle of Beijing. Last year, I think they had a water treatment convention where Bill Gates showed up to show off drinking processed toilet water. That was not what we had imagined would happen in the space, but again, it's a very open, robust, flexible platform, and we're happy that it's kind of really engaged the public that way. So I think another form of engagement, social connectivity, this was this topic that Eddie and I thought was a good way to frame the MahaNakhon project in Bangkok. In a way, there's a lot of things to kind of talk about on the architecture, but I think we wanted to focus on this aspect of social connectivity of the project, meaning how does it engage the public? Where did we find opportunities for the architecture to, in a way, give back to the city, but also things that were not in the original brief that we came up with to tie the building back to the public and back to the city. It's a 314-meter tower, at the time the tallest in Bangkok. There's
We seem to have lost Eric temporarily. Eddie, are you able to dive in?
Yeah. So MahaNakhon, basically is not just is not your normal tower as you can actually see. It is actually an overarching complex that deals with residences, hotel, and stores, and an art complex at the base of the overarching complex. The building to the side, to the right-hand side, is called the Cube. So in a sense, this is it's a multi-purpose system that Bureau S has actually sort of created. Eric wanted to sort of describe the overarching taxonomy of it here in a sort of a peel-off approach. The reason why there is the stepping structure is to devise a better sort of living areas that you could actually sort of see. So there's a lot more, you could say, more sort of transparency towards the outside, so instead of it being overly flat facade. And so you can see the overarching program of all 77 floors from top to bottom, and how it also stacks up in regards to the glazing typology here as well, and how it's subdivided into those three major compartments: the sky residences, the overarching domestic residences, and then the hotel. And as you can see from the rendering here, you can see the different types of lattice works, extrusions that are actually created for more sort of balcony based apartments. The more important factor is the sort of cultural aspect of the complex itself, and what the origins of this from Bureau S were to devise a way that the public access is far more is fully accessible from the street, and to move into this particular space. And so it allows the space to be used in a sort of multifaceted manner: stage, appropriation, theatre, art, and at the heart of it, or you could say at the heart of it, you can see this large 7 to 8 story screen where it interconnects into the BTS, the Thai, the Bangkok transportation system. This was initially a collage, you could say, from the sort of archigram influence. And this is an important factor because of that sense of play and sense of interaction, that sense of social interaction that even from a hedonistic point of view, from what archigram would basically do in the 60s and 70s, that has also poured into and over towards graphic design as well. They are exceptionally influential when it comes to this type of thinking. And so these are shots of the MahaNakhon building being constructed. And at the very end of the project, an addition was actually made. If you can see that sky residence right at the top, that extruded area that sort of cantilevers over the edge, so that people can actually sort of walk on the sky if they wanted to. So that sense of, again, the interaction with space was there, very available.
Hey, Eddie.
Oh,
I'm
hey,
back.
you. I became the architect for at least 5
Yeah.
minutes.
It's ironic that in our social connectivity section that I would get disconnected, but you know, I am behind the Great Firewall, so there may be some connectivity issues there. But yes, as Eddie was describing, the observation deck at the top of the tower, there's a view here of the 5-meter cantilevered sky walk or sky tray where you can actually walk out 314 meters over the city. This has become its own special, very popular Instagram moment. So if we're talking about connectivity in a way, this kind of invisible architecture also manages to somehow achieve a connectivity that we hadn't imagined before. Next image on the overview of the whole observation deck tower. So you can get to the top of the tower, you can see the glass tray at the front, but even kind of go to the very top. And this was not originally open to the public. This was a program that we had looked at, studied, proposed to the client, and they realized that it would be very significant, being the tallest tower in Bangkok, to kind of offer this space back to the city and the public. And it's also a massive revenue generator that pays for itself many times over. But it's very popular, quite welcome. You can see the next slide, people going up to the roof to enjoy the sunset. You've got far-ranging views of Bangkok. You can see the Chao Phraya River on the right. So this was, I don't know if Eddie mentioned earlier, but this is also a project that maybe speaks to commitment and perseverance. For us, it took us 10 years. We started the project when we were at OMA, Ola and I. We launched the project and kind of 2 weeks later, the whole project kind of went into shutdown mode because the pro-democracy side at the time in Bangkok, the protests started and took over the city. That was the so-called yellow shirt protest. That was then followed by Thaksin's populist / nationalist red shirt protests, followed by reaction to that with the yellow shirt protests. Then there was massive flooding in Bangkok. During this whole time, the client was very committed, kept on excavating the foundations in the basement for this tower. And when it started to reach above ground again, Ola and I were at our current office and we resumed our work on the project. But that's just to say, these things go through long and complicated cycles. And I think it's important to keep in mind that you stick with your intentions and play the long view. We were very happy at the moment when it opened. This is a shot where they invited, I think, Jose Carreras to come and open the building. So it's really kind of a character in the city with this, well, yeah, extravagant light show, which was not our intention, but it shows the presence of the building in the city. And we knew that the project had become a bit of a landmark for Bangkok when it showed up in opening credits of Justice League, where there's a Superman banner hanging off the side of it to show it as one of the global metropolises honoring the death of Superman. So I think from there on the media side, I want to let Eddie talk about the media wall that was developed at the front of the project, facing the public side, the SkyTrain in Bangkok.
Right. Thanks, Eric. I'm going to start off with a precursor again to it, and how I had to learn how to design for buildings such as this. This is 745 7th Avenue in Times Square. It's a building that I worked on at, I was one of the designers on at Imaginary Forces. And it was where I started to learn more about the idea of dynamic content, but with motion and aspects of data. And these are specific studies that were created by the team and myself at Imaginary Forces at the time. One of the things about this particular building, it was going to be the Morgan Stanley headquarters, but because of September 11th, they did not actually join, is how to turn it into something a lot less like Times Square, and a lot more sort of having more of a human quality towards it, and more sort of abstracted. So the idea of this is a theme, so we came up with different theme structures that would actually be, you could see, quite artistic at certain times, but also message orientated, that were not commercialized. And the results were very, very interesting about how to sort of integrate a sign system within Times Square at that time. And so to MahaNakhon, how does one actually take some of the things that I'd learned from that particular project, and also create new concepts as well. And the most important thing is to understand one's location and also audience. And so this is, so MahaNakhon is situated in the district of Siloam, which is more of the financial district in Bangkok. And that was one of the important factors in regards to building out the items for the screens. We also understood that, as I said before, the station, the Chomnonsi station, which is the BTS, integrates itself through a glass tunnel into the actual cube. To me, when I first saw this, was the invitation of the first sort of Blade Runner-esque type of project. It's sort of embodiment of that, of the future. And you could say that the challenge here was to not just display graphic messaging across this particular facade. No, the facade should be acted on as architecture, and thus one needs to either be influenced or actually respect the framework, thus the foundations again, right? And what Eric and Ola had done was built out these cassette systems, and that allowed us to think about it and sort of subdivide the graphical elements within. So we would respect the architecture. And to do that, again, in regards to not just displaying graphics right across this particular screen, but one needs to start to adapt to the particular cassette frame. And what we did is sort of look at again, an origin point. So the original brand design was developed by 2x4. And the typeface that we wanted to use that particular typeface and as a kernel to these particular cassette pieces. And so one of the problems is when you place the typeface into a cassette, it's going to be small, and if you want to adapt it, you're going to have to stretch it. And in principle, again, with type, you don't stretch type, you sculpt it, and thus that's what you have to do in regards to this. So what we did on the right-hand side is create a different type of custom typeface basically for the cube itself, and then relayed that into place. But we also looked at the principles of, again, the audience, and subdivided up the screens into specific sets of information, some which is financial, some which is video orientated, some which is Instagram, because Eric had stated that the Instagram moments are really important, and actually in Thailand, it's I think they are one of the highest users of Instagram in the world. And this also became sort of a portal towards other financial information that you can actually learn more about. And in principle, one of the things that is important, that we do have our clocks on our phones as we're walking down the street, but the idea of time and understanding time is very important. And Kevin Lynch, who was actually at MIT, indicated this, that you need to have certain moments within the environment that tells time rather than just your watch in principle. And that allows you to understand your setting and where you are and what the approaches would be. And so that's what we also looked at. We looked at the day, and we also looked at the night, how it would adapt to nighttime, looking at Times Square, and in principle that sort of neon-esque appeal really sort of worked out, that you would sort of push back the back plates, which it creates a lot of noise, but in the daytime it actually is incredibly effective. And this is an example of that, where we developed, as you can see, the different typefaces. It's more of a dimensional form that is based upon as a derivative of the extended form. So it works very, very well. We also created a different type of resolution shape we called the Trixel. And this is based upon the principles that we tested out many different types of resolution for these particular panels to actually work. And at the time, the resolution of these particular panels were not super high, and they didn't need to be. And that was the great thing about it. You would actually get a better, more expressive feel and less detailing from lower res screens, and that's what we utilized. And so you can actually see at certain moments we can take over the screen with very sort of humanist, very natural pieces. You can see in front of you, this is just a video at night, or partly running the screens, and as people would walk through from the BTS into the cube, there's a moment of the sound waves that would basically be connected to the Vogue bar, the music at the top of the Vogue bar, and it would actually respond to that. And so that's another effort that we're sort of trying to look at visualization in an entirely different way, and how it affects architecture and also the social interaction. This is just an expanded view of the sort of dimensional form. So in a way, we were trying to express the idea that even within a dimensional form that you're on, a flat facade even creates more flattened typographic moments, but we wanted to actually dimensionalize that as well. And one of the most important things, again, is looking at the idea of time. And this is just a partial view of very important moments throughout the day. We created different themes that would turn on and off and create different transitions. And so during the day and the sunrise, and then the sun setting, and then the moon rising and the moon setting would actually work. And what we did is we built our own computational sun out of the Trixel system that would actually move at the same trajectory as the sun. And the sun moves every day, very different degrees And so we created that. Somebody on Instagram actually captured the sunset, and our sun actually sort of moving at the same time, which was actually really quite amazing. Eric, do you want to talk about the importance of the aspects of hardware and software?
Yeah. So there's the literal understanding of hardware and software, and I think what Eddie and I wanted to talk about is how this applies to design. We've got 2 projects to show.
Yeah.
But I think the hardware side is kind of easy for people to understand. The software side is really about both. There's programming and coding, which Eddie also does, but also the operational structure of how spaces are used, how design is used. And I think this first example, Maker Shaker, is a good one that shows how these 2 sides interface. And I think as designers who are often focused, architects are often focused on the hardware, but it's important to keep thinking about the software or the user interface.
Yeah, this is very close. This project is very close to MIT's heart. I was asked by Carlo Ratti to join his team in the Sensible Cities Lab for this particular project. Carlo, excited me from the very moment I stepped into his office, and he explained this particular project to myself and one of my associates. I sort of looked towards my associate and said, "This is the craziest project I've ever heard of, and I'll definitely do it." So Maker Shaker is a project that was conceived by Carlo and his team with the sponsorship and funding from Coca-Cola and Bacardi to create, and I should play this video now, the robots making cocktails. And it's really about robot interaction and social interaction as well. Carlo had worked extensively on building out the idea that the Cuckoo Robots can actually create these particular drinks, these cocktails. And so what we did was build out a interface and data visualization that allowed people to interact with the robots by making their drinks, displaying it onto the screen, and then the robots would actually produce it. So it's a processing. It would actually show you the ingredients and the wait times and also how the data is collated and collected. We also did it at Google I/O with stripping out all the Facebook OAuth principles. And the important factor, the thing that I basically learned from this particular project was the importance of data. If you really think about it, and how that data actually interacts with that data interacts with the element of the hardware. But if you think about it, in principle, similar to like a digital twin structure, you can build out as many different types of drinks products as you want, based on again, the social interaction of people being engaged, wanting an understanding experience, interacting with the system, trying out different drinks. And whilst they're doing that, the system's actually measuring them over the course of time and understanding them more and more in regards to their particular measurements of ingredients, and then collecting that and sorting it in a particular way to find the best approaches and the best tasting solutions. And that is an impressive structure. You know, why are we so enamored with just sitting at our desks on Instagram and then the information is being collated, whilst, which is just absolutely disastrous. This is a better principle, and also you could say partly dangerous principle, but a risky principle, let's put it that way, to the idea of actually collating data that can actually be given back to you immediately with really great results. And so these are just more slides in regards to explaining that. We built the interface items in just approximately 30 days. So it was, I would say, a feat of being really excited, but also being very, very nervous to see if it worked, and it did work. I mean, I'm always interested in Eric's work and how Eric actually explains particular processes, and actually having a psychology degree definitely does help understanding human nature. And you know, when Eric actually sort of explained this particular project to me, I was very much impressed. This is the Dinan de Luca stage. And Eric, do you want to continue?
Yeah, so I think Maker Shaker is a example of kind of rapid prototyping, right? 30 days to program and realize the whole thing for, I think it was Milan Design Festival, right?
Right.
This is a project, also a prototype that we did with Dinan de Luca, who are kind of originally New York-based gourmet food purveyors for Design Miami, but also for kind of a large rollout. They were looking at a lot of different spaces and how to do a new prototype for what they traditionally serve is coffee, pastries, some prepared foods, salads, but also sandwiches and other items that are prepared. So we had this idea of creating a stage that could be kind of mobilized. And one of the first things to look at was, again, what are the operational procedures in food preparation? We looked at this actually in quite detail, but also as a model. Typically, F&B, food and beverage spaces are counter against one side and the space on the other side, and customers approach it in one direction. And we thought we should try to actually put it in the center, the main food space, allow people to approach from all different sides and create almost a stage where the people preparing the food are the actors and the customers are the audience. And this also works in terms of what people are actually looking for. So here's a quick view of, you know, a four-sided approach to this prototype. And the advantage of it would be that it could be an object in space that you could place in many different environments. And that was kind of the framework and the concept for how to do this as a rollout. Here's some examples of the different spaces it could go into. And you can see the same prototype can be mobilized and installed into different spaces. And the approach to the space that it goes in would be to kind of strip them down to their kind of bare essence, and then insert the object that could have the same performance in many different spaces. So you're not having to custom design a different prototype for every space. And it also gives each space a local specificity. So wherever you insert this stage, it reflects the environment, it performs in a similar way that is kind of optimal. I was mentioning, what people go to Dinan de Luca for. And there are, in terms of operationally, on the software side, we also worked with a whole team of kitchen consultants, food experts, obviously Dinan de Luca, also their chefs and creating new menus. But everything was down to actually foot counts. How many steps does someone have to take to prepare the food? How long does it take them to do it? and the proximity of all the kitchen equipment. So we did develop, I think the next slide probably shows a fast lane and a slow lane. I know, topography first. How to present the food, and where maker shaker use Cuckoo Robots to actually serve the cocktails. Since we were prototyping this, we developed a landscape for cold, warm, refrigerated foods, pastries that required dryness. So there's actually heating and cooling elements integrated into this countertop, and that's all CNC milled, computer numeric controlled milled topography to create this kind of two-way island or stage where one side could be fast and the other side would be kind of made to order slow. So if you just want to get a coffee and pick up a pastry, you can kind of go one direction with the fewest footfalls, or if you wanted to order custom-made things, there would be another direction to the island with checkout and collection on two places, and a center island that accommodated all the prep and refrigeration. So here's a rendered view of it. We prototyped, since it's not a huge scale prototype, we did actually build this out in our studio in Berlin, 1:1 scale to test dimensions and proportions. Then it was sent to Queens where the actual prototyping was done and the milling of this whole kind of topography. And then from Queens, it went on to Design Miami, where we could test out the actual performance of the prototype before a larger rollout. So here it is functioning as the actual caterer to Design Miami. And I think there's one more view that shows that it is indeed in Miami because you can see the palm trees. It was all a good way to kind of test out the hypothesis of operations working or not working. I'm sure we also identified areas where there could be improvement or optimization, and that this kind of study informed the rollout of the further rollout of the prototypes. This is, Dinan de Luca was a small scale prototype for a very large rollout. And I think this section we wanted to briefly talk about also a sense of prototype for a very large scale project. The first one about synergy, a second one about serendipity. This is a project in London at the former Olympics, Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park site. And it involved a number of organizations, cultural institutions, the V&A, UAL, College of Fashion, Sadler Wells Dance Theater, and at the time an unclear museum institution, which became the Smithsonian. But what we looked at here was the original model on the left from 1800s Albertopolis looked at a linear organization of museum institutions, this kind of promenade idea. And we thought for the next generation of this iteration of multiple cultural institutions coming together, which I think Boris Johnson had named Olympicopolis for the site, how to kind of mix these things in a way that weren't so linear, because I think how the public approaches cultural institutions and also how they are combined together now is a much more mixed, non-linear, multivalent proposition. So this idea of how to mix them together, we had the idea of coming up with the culture machine, almost to take these institutions and use it as an engine to generate culture innovation, but also to kind of allow all the contents and the experiences to engage the public. So it's along a river, it's a skinny peninsular site. We created what we call the cultural plateau. And from this elevated portion, you can get to the various institutions. And you can see here the kind of carving out of different spaces. But it's all based on a system of, here's a view of it next to Zaha's Aquatic Center on the right in Queen Elizabeth Park. It was a master plan concept feasibility study to also prove to the London Legacy Development Corporation that this much density could be accommodated on the site. But what allows it to happen in a way is still the modular prototype. You can see that each of the blocks are arranged almost in these loops. which we called loop modules. The next slide, I think, shows the different qualities that could be enabled by each of the institutions having these loops of different sizes, but it meant as a basic unit, and they're quite large scale, but as a basic unit, daylight, natural ventilation, structural systems, circulation through the loops, the ability to green them, the ability to have indoor courtyards, and the flexibility of column-free structures meant that each of the different institutions could actually occupy these loops that could be sized or dimensioned to their needs in a way that allowed them to be stacked. And we also developed with Arab a structural system that would allow this kind of modular flexibility to almost take each of the blocks and just stack them on top of each other. And what you end up with is very different programs organized in close proximity. And I think where the name synergy comes from, or the idea of synergy comes from, is that by combining each of these institutions and putting them together, the whole becomes larger than the sum of its parts. So that was important for us to show as a proof of concept. Here you can see the different programs occupying the different blocks. But this assemblage also means that each of the institutions, while they do want to be together and identified as a whole, they also want their own identity. So you want to be able to see where is the V&A, Victoria and Albert, where is Sadler's Wells, and where is UAL Student Center, et cetera. And this arrangement allowed them to still be part of a group, but have their own individual identities through massing, through signage. This is a view from the pedestrian bridge from the Aquatic Center. And one view, I think, of the internal areas where one of the effects that we found is that through cross-programming, combining these institutions, that there were all these interstitial spaces, or so-called interstitial spaces, that could be used by or shared by institutions. So where the V&A did not need certain areas for exhibition full-time, the UAL could take it over, or Sadler's Wells could do performance in these spaces. There are courtyard areas that are shared, so there could be mixed programming and cross-programming. And all of that would kind of show how these institutions, by being together, were much stronger than being apart in the typical kind of distributed campus arrangement. Another example, we were invited for a competition in Berlin for the Axel Springer headquarters, and their question was, they're one of the largest media publishing empire groups. They had acquired over the years, I think, something like 100 digital startups. And the main question was, when you can work from anywhere, why would you go to an office and work? This is maybe particularly relevant at the moment, given the pandemic environment. But this question was really about why would people go to an office if you can work from home? And our answer really was what you gain from being together in collaborative space is what would draw all these digital startups. So we arranged a building that would accommodate typical offices. I think there's a next slide that shows an envelope of typical offices. No, this is the view from the actual site. It's a very interesting historic location. It's right on the line of in Berlin, between the East Berlin, West Berlin. It crosses the line of the Berlin Wall. This is symbolically both to show this idea of collaboration in the heart of the building, but also a window through the two sides. I think the next slide shows what I was talking about, an envelope of standard offices, but then in the center, this carved out void, which we call the collaborative cloud, which would accommodate all the digital startups. So, finance, accounting, and legal, which need kind of typical offices, are occupied on the envelope at the center, really is for all the digital startups. And they're arranged in a way that allows for both horizontal expansion, where they grow from 15 to 35 to 50 people to more, but also vertical expansion by vertical connectivity through stairs or secondary means of circulation. So they start out in one position and then grow, but also by being in this space, they can see where others are also doing things, what their activities are. This was designed through a series of vignettes to show all the different modes of working in a way and the different spaces that could be combined into a collaborative cloud. And the idea of serendipity is really that by putting people together, innovation is often driven by happenstance or chance encounters with people who you did not think that you were going to run into. It's not a new idea. It's something that's been talked about for a long time in agile workspace. But this was something that we thought applied particularly well to this project. Integrated futures. Yeah.
Yeah, we I know that we're getting to the hopefully end. I think we've got about just 40 slides left and about 5 minutes, 4 to 5 minutes. Try to move as fast as possible about the future integrated futures. I think you know, from what Eric has talked about in regards to the previous project in Berlin, an important factor here, you know, is the idea of how does one create a new digital identity as well through the aspects of architecture and also visual communication. And you know, we have talked, you know, we have brought up the term Internet of Things previously, and potentially artificial intelligence. And how does that sort of come into being on the projects like this? Both graphic designers and architects need to know and learn more about these particular areas. The examples I actually have in front of you are quite funny, but also very serious. And so we are at a point right now that IoT is really now, Internet of Things is integrating into our domestic life. But the approach of it being more, let's say, humanized or utilizing certain aspects and reacting in a sort of more human manner of nurturing hasn't actually occurred as well. This project that I'm about to show you, called Arthur, sort of integrates the idea of the Nest and Tamagotchi together. We were asked by architects to develop a data visualized aspect for a school that had flooded and was destroyed and bring into New York. And so we came up with an idea that we would not only visualize the information, but also look at it from the point of view that it integrates into the curriculum of the school itself, the STEM school itself. And to do that, we had to sort of look at, and this is a K-5 school, just to let you know, is look at give it a personality. The new building is fully sustainable. It's platinum LEED based. It doesn't flood. It's on stilts. But how does a child or a 5-year-old to a 10-year-old understand the principles of this particular school? It's just a school. How can they learn that the sustainability elements in the school are exceptionally important, so they can actually be affected by it and then go into the public and communicate to within the public eye and also at home how to be sustainable as well. And that was a very sort of tricky sort of situation. We also had to develop a system that's different, which is very tiered in communicating to the students, you know, what certain things are. If we got a child that's 4 or 5 years old, icons would be better. They can't really read. Maybe they can actually use the abbreviated descriptors to learn what a lighting power is, or HVAC heating actually is. But then developing an overarching foundation of icons that also are animated to relay information to them is also important. So the system would actually tell the the children about PV paneling, saving on heating and cooling, where if the school is flooding, the flood level structures, but also at the same time would quiz them in regards to math, very simple math or English that is interconnected to the ideas of sustainability, but also allows them to actually draw, learn how to actually draw their letters. So we basically looked at a type referencing in regards to how children would actually draw type onto a particular page, knowing that Futura, being a very sort of geometric, very simple, stripped down typeface, could actually do that, but then creating a customized character structure, because Futura in certain circumstances doesn't really do what children need to do to draw letters on. And then we integrated that idea of drawing on into the energy metering structure of actually how you would draw on the volume of heat that actually is being utilized, or cooling, or less or more. And so this is a prime example of that in regards to them knowing that energy is being utilized and so on. We created through 8 different systems that are pitted around the school and in different areas. The most important thing is the expressiveness of the system. These children normally, when we've noticed, when they interact with the things in groups, they gather together and touch and walk off. But they are also quite inquisitive in regards to it. But what if you aren't touched, and and it's like a body that you're talked to, that you speak to? They actually are more alert and actually would like to have a better conversation. And we find that from the IoT systems that we actually have in our homes now, such as Alexa. And this system was built on the Google API structure. And what would happen is that if there's high energy usage and low interaction, it would actually have an expression that was really low. But if it's actually in a good mood, a happy mood, it's a high level of interaction and conversation and a low energy usage. So you can basically know what's in between. So the children would understand what is actually going on and actually have conversation, or maybe conversation or commands with the system. This is us building, and my friend Robert Langhorne, industrial designer, former professor at Pratt and Royal College trained, building the system out. Again, the idea of actually integrating graphics onto the object was really important. The venting was not just holes, but they actually say, it actually says MacArthur School, elementary school in code, in binary. We did, as graphic designers, have a lot of fails.
Arthur, weather.
Good night, see you tomorrow. Good night, see you tomorrow.
So the whole idea is that graphic designers, we're not saying that we want to be programmers, but we need to learn more about programming and other areas, and we need to adopt to get to the next level of who we actually are and how we actually evolve. A lot of people say we're just going to evolve into user interface designers, and that's not the fact at all. We will be many different things. This is my son, Jakob, when he was younger, speaking to my designer, Jack, and Arthur, the Arthur system.
So we start with hello, Arthur. All right.
Hello?
Hello, how can I help you?
Let's try what is your name?
What is your name?
One second.
What is your name?
My name is Arthur.
So, the video also carries on and starts to relay in aspects of numbers. At a certain time, you go through the system, it basically says what's going on in the building, how the building's happy, it's great, but let's do a quiz. And that quiz is about numbers or words, so they can actually learn a little bit more about sustainability, or the numbers that are being taken from the data that day and utilized for it. And these are images of the system installed into the school. And this is the flood structure of it.
I'm going to break in here because I think we want to make sure we get to time for questions, because there's some pretty cool questions coming up in the chat.
Yeah, understood. So should I stop here? Yep.
If that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah. This actually may come up later. So
okay,
put it on the screen, shall I? Or shall I stop and share? Let me stop.
Why don't we share so we can all come on, and then you can potentially zoom back as well. So I think we're all here, and we'll be promoted on screen in a second. But I think I would really start off with a question that synthesizes some of the ones that have come up in the chat, and really deals with the day-to-day of the sort of projects we're showing. Is like, what are your ground rules for collaboration? Who gets to say what? How do you stay friends? And how do you reach across professional and cultural divides to make something great like the work you've been showing happen out of it?
Well, we're both highly critical people, but we're somehow pretty easygoing. So our collaboration has been very smooth. Even putting together the talk, I think, is quite organic with Eddie in terms of what we started with conversation, really, to find out what we wanted to talk to you about.
Yeah, I basically concur on that aspect. Really trying to, when gathering our works, how and where are we interconnecting, and also what are new things that we're actually finding from the sort of the gathered information. Yeah.
And I think somehow maybe an important part of it in collaboration is you need to have interest in what the other person is doing. So I have a genuine interest in Eddie's design and programming, and I think he has a genuine interest in architecture, and we don't see the approaches from a conceptual point of view. I think we also approach things with a similar methodology or openness. So that helps, I think.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I totally agree with that as well. I think it's also that my time in different types of studios, working with architects, especially at 2x4, and the interconnection and the affiliation with OMA was exceptionally strong, and I always will appreciate that time we had. Yeah.
I'm also going to take this opportunity to introduce Miko McGinty, who's working with us in the school this entire year on these questions of media and community building. So Miko, do you want to go over and ask some more questions from our audience tonight?
Yes, I would be happy to. Eddie, I want to say that we were in graduate school together, and you were always like an incredibly innovative thinker then, and also incredibly collaborative. I mean, I think you had a partnership with one of your other classmates in MAP, and you also, I always think about how you did the project with the artist Tohosa, who was in the sculpture program, and we were in the graphic design program. And it was sort of effortless for you to make a connection with him, although that was not the norm. That's not what anyone else was doing at the time. And so anyway, I just wanted to follow up on the collaboration there. Okay, so one of the questions from the audience here is, speaking to your collaboration on some of the projects you mentioned, have you seen the nature of working together, collaborating change over the past year because of COVID, which of course it has, everything has changed. How have you seen the communication tools of architecture and design fail or succeed in this period?
Yeah, I'll start, and I'll start sort of backwards. You know, so I have I'll add another conspiracy theory to all the conspiracy theories that where, you know, the tech companies actually set up the idea of COVID based on the aspect that they want us to be at home and test out their software. I mean, that's got some, you know, it's got some legs.
I may need to break in like an MSNBC here.
Oh yeah, I think that's happening right now as we speak.
So, you know, you know, there's this sense of the idea of a catalyst that's missing. And what I mean is it's like we're wanting to be sped up to really get ourselves conditioned to actually work in this particular way, and it's not really working out. The element of collaborating with one's team in conversation it doesn't feel true to the point. But the sense that we can be in a room and actually start to engage upon new ideas, you cannot sort of take that, you know, that's been taken away, and there's a void that's actually occurred. And maybe that's different for other people, but that has, you know, for me, and I think my team has been quite complicated, especially when you're doing as a graphic designer, especially when you're doing multiple jobs. I mean, you're doing at least 20 to 24 jobs. You can't deal with that particular measure of project work at that within this sort of you know, monolithic structure, as it were. I don't know how that has been for you, Eric. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the situation has definitely accelerated trends, whether.
Oh no.
I think we've lost Eric again.
I think we lost Eric.
That is in some ways its own very appropriate answer to the question. Challenges we face.
Yeah,
it's kind of glitchy.
The idea of actually improving the system is really absolutely intriguing. I have, you know, from a project managerial sort of standpoint, I've actually sort of wondered whether or not the Internet of Things would actually be more prominent in its use. You know, where the Alexas and the OK Googles and the Siris of the world actually start to become more prevalent and allow us to have better conversations with them without them just being command orientated. Sorry, Eric, you were saying.
Yeah, I'm not sure where I got cut off, but I mean, it's normal for us to work remotely in some ways, right? We've got studios we work internationally. We've got projects all over the world. We've got studios in Beijing, London, Bangkok, Berlin. We're used to collaborating with teams in different places. So in that sense, you know, that interaction has continued, but I think there is an aspect of in-person meeting. And obviously when we worked with international projects, we were traveling a lot, and there's no more travel at the moment. So one of the most noticeable points for me, I think, was when I had to go through a 14-day quarantine when I was coming back to Beijing. And even though you're actually talking to people all day long on Zoom calls, and my family also in the next room, there was still a huge difference between seeing people face to face and on a screen. And you see it in isolation when you're stuck in isolation for a while. You do notice that the actual face to face human component that's missing, and it's something that people will need. So I don't see that really going away anytime soon.
I think also an important factor is time and understanding time. Not really aspects of space, but one is rushed from one point to another point to another point to another point to another point. So in a way, you know, you don't really measure time anymore.
Yeah.
And that is problematic. It actually feels like you're in a casino in Las Vegas, where there are no clocks, but you can actually see your clock on your computer. But again, these, you know, and you have this sort of front light that you have to light yourself each and every time, and so the idea of space and time is really sort of you know, it's very, very strange, and that's incredibly problematic.
I think it's sort of ironic because we live in flatness on Zoom, like we're all flat, we're all flattened out. And so, and as graphic designers, that's something we're pretty comfortable with. But as architects, I would think it's like distressing in thinking about space and volume and time.
Although, Miko, I have to jump in there because we've been, you and I have been working together. We're co-designing these publications that are going to try and be a common space of media for the school this year, for the department. And we're actually having issues because one of the major things we're producing is a three-dimensional physical publication of the school's work when we don't have the shared space of the studio that's for students to communicate with each other. But we're asking students to prototype it, and only in the second of the two classes we've done, at the very end, have students actually started to think about what happens when you open a page, go to another page, and have the kind of sequencing of a three-dimensional object, because we've sort of, you know, figured out ways to get them to printers and things like that, which, so I think one of the things I really appreciate about the collaborations tonight is that it was often very difficult to tell where one part of a three-dimensional experience began and where another part of a three-dimensional ended, even though the kind of legal and administrative boundaries between architecture and graphic design are a little more obvious in the work you showed.
Yeah, I think you can see that also in the work that Eddie does, right? It's graphic design, but he's moving between flat and physical in a lot of the work. For sure, for us also in architecture, more and more of it is all being done digitally, right? You can't, it has to be done digitally. And so we are also collaborating across our different studios, virtually and digitally, but there is always something else that you see and learn when you make the physical object. So a lot of work is done digitally, but we're constantly also looking at things physically in models, because there's always something that it's very easy to miss things in the digital realm because you are looking at a flat screen.
You know, there's also, you know, for both of us, this idea of like, how do you really compartmentalize time for yourself to really think things through, even though in this sort of a collaborative space per se. And that's incredibly complicated. You have, and this is, you know, you could say that Slack is a parasite within the overarching architecture of your computer, where, you know, yes, you can shut it off from notifications, but then you're like, oh my God, I totally forgot to turn it back on. And then you see, it's just like email. You just see the amount of notifications, like, where are you? What, you know, we had to send this off. So there's something about being in a space with others that they know to leave you alone at certain times. And that notion, I don't believe that the digital world will ever really, you know, get correct. But it's going to definitely try. Why? I don't know. But it's I think it's really just curiosity's sake, and then also it becomes a commodity. Yeah.
Miko, do you want to ask one last question?
Yes.
5 minutes.
I think there are a number of questions here about the public space. And so I think I can kind of compress them into one question. Where do the obligations to the client and the public join and divide? And then sort of another facet of this is like, how do you as designers like ensure that the privately owned spaces that are open to the public are truly inclusive and welcoming to diverse populations. So a little bit of a diversity question in there too.
Eric, do you want to take that first?
Sure. I think there's a few stages to that, actually, how to expand the public. Obviously, we are interested in making our architecture accessible to the public as much as possible. So the first step is to be selective about your clients. Public clients obviously will have public projects. Private clients, you need to find ones where their ambitions align with where you think you want to take something. We don't know at the beginning of a project where it'll go, but you can kind of read clients in terms of what do they want from it and how much do they want to give back. So I think on MahaNakhon, it was very clear from the beginning from Kun Ying that he wanted this project to give something back to the city. And that was very important for us as a starting point. Stage one. Stage two, I think, is a bit of a, I don't want to sound condescending, but there is a learning curve and an educational curve to engaging and collaborating with the whole team, but with clients also. So what we look for is, a certain framework and a mindset, and you build that up through concept stage development. But, as you work more and more with someone, you can also kind of test how far they are willing to go. And so we're always looking for a new program, and that's where the observation deck for MahaNakhon came in. This was not in the original brief. We came up with the design, the architecture was there, and we said, look, you've got a space at the top. Wouldn't it be great to give that to the public? And you have to go through also the next stage, besides having the client agree with it, to make sure that it works operationally, feasibly, economically, financially. So all of those, I think, are steps that you have to take to get something to work. The end goal is to have space that can be shared with the public, that is inclusive, that does not have high barriers to access. And a lot of that is driven by economics in some ways, but some of it is also not driven by economics. You could say both MahaNakhon and the Guardian Arts Center are relatively high level, cultural institutions. So how accessible are they really to the public? I think MahaNakhon is very accessible, is completely open to the public. There's the square, there's many levels, right? There's a square, there's a retail, there's the roof deck, which is I think in Thai baht, probably $15 ticket to go to the observation deck. Guardian Arts Center is also, it's a private auction house, but anyone can actually go into the auctions, whether you are really buying something or not. So I think there's different degrees to it. Eddie, I think, yeah.
I totally agree with Eric there. And one of the things is, when you're dealing with inclusivity is accessibility. And that is a growing challenge, especially within the public realm today. We are now constantly looking at the sort of federal rules on accessibility, and that's normally through the disabled, but now it is actually more towards the towards everybody, includes everybody, and also the aspects of language and what type of language you want to utilize. And one has to be very careful. But the federal rules have not been they're up to date, but they don't go far enough. And so there are organizations that are trying to not only sort of establish the sort of 508, the ADA laws at the core, but actually create a larger surface around them that has a lot more inclusivity within the idea of message and material. That we as also graphic designers have to understand, but there's one area that is very problematic, not so much from the phone that you utilize, that you have on a day-to-day basis, but the efforts that you would actually have on digital screens that are integrated into the architecture. And there are no rules at all, and so we are trying to suggest better better understanding in those particular areas, being more practical for being more accessible. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, another thing that you just said, Eddie, that reminds me, we were going to show a few examples actually where I think inclusivity comes from public engagement, right? Community engagement, where if more of the community is involved in the actual design process, that will naturally lead to more inclusive outcomes. And Eddie had an example of working with Sidewalk Labs in Toronto. We went through a similar process actually in Vancouver. The Canadians are very inclusive. Two projects in Vancouver where we went through iterative processes and meetings with the city, with the planning department, open houses, community groups, historic preservation, multiple meetings of a 2-year process just to get the design further along. And this meant also that while these were private projects, because they're going into the city, we were very involved in making sure that there would be enough public space, public art, space left for the public realm, how the project connects to the city. And that was a very admirable process, completely transparent, very involved. And I think for designers also very engaging.
Yeah, there's, the aspects of the Toronto Tomorrow project, one needed to really value the community and look at it from the prospects that, okay, this is a large complex on the east side of Toronto, largest complex to be built. But how does a community comprehend that? How do you put it into their type of words? And how do they actually have a voice? And in principle, you actually have to come at it like a brand, and understand the values, the pillars that hold it up, and suggest the positioning, and then to suggest the tone of voice that you want to engage with the community. And that's what graphic designers do on a day-to-day basis. And then how does that, connect into the different types of materials that you are communicating with, such as books, online, within a public space, and then from then on, what is that? Another experience is who is engaging with them at that time. So this is a 24-hour process. This is not like, let's go to a municipal building, sit down in a chair and start screaming at an architect who's got some boards up. No, you really can't do that anymore. That is pretty close to dead. And the real suggestion is that you really have to value the overarching elements of how to sort of visually and literally communicate to your audience in a very more expressive, more human manner than before. Yeah.
Well, I think that is the best possible moment to spirit to end on in this week at this moment. So with that plea for inclusion in design to roll in it, I will thank very much our guests tonight, Eddie Opara, Miko McGinty, Eric Chang, and thanks to all of you for coming. I'll give a quick thanks to MIT's video production team and to the department staff, particularly Amanda Moore, for supporting this event, to Emily Wisseman, one of our master's students who's been helping to field all your questions tonight behind the scenes. We hope you will join us next Thursday, November 12th at 6 p.m. for a lecture and discussion hosted with the Aga Khan Program for Islamic Architecture. Ikem Stanley Okoye will speak about elusive things, materialities and spatialities in the vicinity of Niger. Then on November 19th, we'll host renowned landscape architect Walter Hood at the 26th Annual Piero Belushi Lecture. Dana Cunningham, Executive Director of MIT's CoLab, and students from the school will join for an essential discussion on hybrid landscapes and community co-design. Please see the full list of upcoming events at architecture.mit.edu, and we hope to see you with us again. Thank you all and have a wonderful evening.